He sold his daughter like a sack of flour, no receipt, no shame, no second glance. All it took was a jug of goat's milk and a bottle of wine. That's what Thaddeus Vane, a man in a black robe with no soul beneath it, thought a broken girl was worth. He thought no one would care. He thought she'd die quietly. But what he didn't count on was Evelyn Shaw choosing to live. Not just breathe, not just survive, but to plant herself in the kind of soil where even winter couldn't kill hope. And Silas Montgomery, a man who hadn't spoken more than a paragraph in 10 years, looked at her not like a burden, but like fire that hadn't finished burning. So, if you've ever been discarded, underestimated, or called less than stick around. Because the girl in the wheelchair isn't the one who needs saving. It's the men who tried to silence her. The sun had no warmth that morning, though it burned mercilessly on the dust. It peeled paint from doors, dried the sweat before it could reach a man's collar, and made liars of those who still believed summer was a season of life. She sat on the porch like a forgotten parcel, quiet, small. Her hands folded neatly over her lap, as if she'd rehearsed how to look undeserving of attention. Her name was Evelyn Shaw. The judge hadn't used it, not once. Not when he pulled her from the wagon. Not when he handed over the stained brown envelope with the deed to nothing. Not even when he spat. She's your trouble now. Thaddeus Vane had been a tall man once, respected, revered even in his black coat and polished gavel. But time had made him sour, and power made him cruel. He no longer stood tall. He loomed. Silas Montgomery didn't answer right away. He stared at the girl, at the thinness of her wrists, at the wheel-bound chair that had left deeper tracks in the dirt than her voice had in the air. "I didn't ask for charity," Silas said. No, Vane replied, laughing like a man who'd long since stopped recognizing shame. "You didn't. You got a woman, and I got peace." He dropped the bottle of red wine into Silas's palm with a thud, and a jug of goat's milk, he added, mocking. "We call that a fair trade, don't we?" Evelyn didn't flinch, not even when the judge turned his back on her for the last time. She didn't reach for his coat, didn't beg. Only her eyes moved, tracking him until he disappeared over the ridge, leaving a smear of arrogance in the dust behind him. Silas waited until long after the sound of the judge's horse had gone before he stepped toward her. "I've got hay in the wagon," he said, voice low. Not soft, but better than boards. She looked up at him then, and there was something in her eyes he hadn't expected, not gratitude, not hope. Something heavier, something like shame wrapped in defiance. "I don't need soft," she said. Her voice was steady, but her lip trembled when she finished the sentence. It wasn't fear, it was restraint, like a woman who had learned that crying made people walk away faster. He nodded. They didn't speak again for the rest of the day. That night, Silas built the ramp. He worked in silence, lantern flickering beside him like a ghost who didn't want to be seen. His hands were stiff from an old war, his knees worse from a fire that had claimed more than flesh. But he hammered each board into place like it meant something. Like it mattered that a woman who couldn't walk could still choose where to sit. Inside the cabin, Evelyn lay awake on the cot, listening. Not to the wind, not to the crickets, but to the sound of a man choosing effort over pity. When he came back inside, covered in sweat and splinters, she didn't look at him, but her fingers curled once around the edge of the blanket, a quiet thank you wrapped in cotton. A week passed. The sky didn't change, but Evelyn did. She began rising earlier, learned where Silas kept the coffee, began folding his shirts with fingers that remembered rhythm. She never asked for his stories, and he never offered. But some mornings they'd sit by the fire like ghosts beside each other, one who had died, standing, the other who had died sitting down. On the 8th morning, she spoke. You think I'm here because you feel sorry for me." He didn't look up from whittling the fence post, just turned the blade one more time against the grain. "No," he said. "I think you're here because you didn't cry when he sold you." Evelyn swallowed. The chair creaked as she shifted. "He always said my spine broke because I was too proud, that I leaned too hard into what didn't belong to me." Silas finally looked up. His eyes weren't warm, but they weren't empty either. "Then he's wrong," he said. "Spine don't break from pride. It breaks from being born in a house where you're only loved if you're easy to carry." She looked at him a long time. Then she said, almost whispering, "My mother died when I was 10. After that, he stopped pretending I was a person." He didn't reply, but his hands stilled. The fire popped once, like it wanted to fill the silence. Evelyn's voice came again, softer now. "He used to say God made me wrong, that a woman who couldn't bear children or walk had no business being seen. Said I should be grateful he kept me hidden." She stopped. Her breath caught in her chest, like a bird that forgot how to fly. And then, in a voice no louder than falling snow, she added, "He told me I wasn't worth a name anymore, just worth a price." The next morning there were wildflowers in a jar beside her cot. No note, no explanation, just the quiet presence of someone who had listened and didn't turn away. By the third week, Silas carved a small shelf for her beside the stove. By the fourth, she had filled it with folded linens, tins of herbs, and a worn book of psalms with a cracked leather spine. And on the first night, she laughed a real laugh, full-throated, and sudden the mule in the stable brayed in confusion. Silas just shook his head and kept stirring the stew. But healing like rain in the desert doesn't come without warning. And Evelyn still had nights when her hands shook, when the sound of boots on porch wood made her flinch, when she woke up with her teeth clenched and a scream buried behind her tongue. On those nights, Silas didn't ask. He simply left the lantern burning a little longer, left the door unlocked. And once, when she sat on the porch until sunrise staring at nothing, he brought her a mug of hot water with cinnamon and said, "Some mornings start hard. That don't mean the day won't soften." She didn't answer, but her hand brushed his when she took the cup, and that was enough. By the end of the month, Evelyn had learned this. Healing isn't a parade, it's a shelf, a ramp, a chair by the fire that no one moves. It's a man who doesn't ask her to stand, but never lets her feel small. And it's the whisper she finally spoke out loud one night when Silas was out fixing the fence and the moon lit the garden bed he'd started for her. "I'm still here. Not in defiance, not in rage, just in quiet truth." And in that truth, she began to grow roots. The wagon creaked to a stop just before dusk, where the cottonwoods leaned tired over a narrow path. The cabin stood beyond quiet and weather-worn, like it had been waiting too long for someone to come home and finally didn't expect them anymore. Evelyn Shaw didn't lift her head. Silas Montgomery climbed down first. His knees groaned, and so did he, though not out loud. With slow hands, he untied the tarp and uncovered her a woman with hair like ash and eyes that refused to blink long enough to cry. Her wheelchair sat lashed behind the seat, and he unhooked it wordlessly, setting it down in the dry dust like something sacred. Then, as gently as a man whose hands had once strangled rifles could manage, he lifted her from the wagon. She weighed less than she looked, but more than she let on. She didn't speak. He didn't expect her to. Inside, the floor creaked like bones. The fireplace was cold, the windows smudged with old wind and dust. He set her down on the wooden rocker by the hearth, but she didn't settle into it. She sat stiff, as though waiting for someone to tell her where punishment would begin. Silas knelt beside her chair. "I'll build a ramp." Evelyn blinked. "Just once. Not thanks, not disbelief, Just acknowledgement. He stood, removed his coat, and went out to the barn. He worked through the night, by lantern, by memory, by instinct, hammering boards with hands that had once buried a wife and child in the same week. The nails split wood more than they held it, but it would do. Just enough for her to roll in and out without asking. That was the promise he'd made. Not in words, but in choice. The moon rose full behind the clouds. Somewhere, a coyote howled once and gave up. By morning, the ramp was done. She didn't use it at first, just stared at it through the open door wrapped in a wool shawl like armor. Her fingers twitched in her lap, pale and trembling, as if the bones underneath weren't sure they deserved movement. Silas cooked eggs. Badly. She didn't eat. "You need strength," he said. "I need a world that doesn't hate me." She answered, not loud but steady. He nodded. "I can't build that. Just the porch." The silence after that wasn't cruel. It was tired. Shared between them like a blanket too small to cover everything, but just enough to keep breathing under. He worked the fence line that day. She wheeled to the edge of the porch, watching with narrowed eyes. Her hands never left her lap. When he glanced up once, she didn't look away. Neither did he. That night, they didn't speak at dinner. Just stew. Just firelight. Just two people who didn't have anything left to trade but time. On the third day, Evelyn finally wheeled down the ramp. Slow. Deliberate. Like she wasn't sure it would hold. When she reached the dirt, she paused. Looked at Silas, who stood by the well with an axe in one hand and a question in his eyes. "I had a brother," once she said, her voice like rusted wind chimes. "He died in a pond behind my father's house. He was 7. I was 12. My father told people he slipped." Silas said nothing. He didn't. She looked away. He jumped in because father told him boys who cry are weak. And Michael, he'd been crying all week. The silence thickened. The axe handle creaked under Silas's grip. "I tried to save him. I tried." Her voice cracked but didn't break. "Father said I let him die, and that was the first time he called me useless. Second was when I got sick." Silas walked toward her, slow and careful, the way you approach a deer that hasn't decided whether to run or bolt. He crouched beside her again, not touching, just being there. "You didn't let him die," he said. "You weren't there." "No," he nodded. "But I've seen guilt take root in good hearts, and it always lies louder than the truth." She closed her eyes. Her breath caught once in her throat, then steadied. That night, when the wind picked up and the lantern flickered against the logs, Evelyn spoke again. "I don't want to need you." Silas didn't flinch. "You don't." Her laugh was bitter. "I live in your house, eat your food, sit in your chair. You sit in your spine, Evelyn." That silenced her. He stood, tossed a log into the fire. The pop and hiss filled the room like defiance. "I don't pity you," he said. "I wouldn't insult you that way. I lost someone too. And I'm not trying to replace her." "Then why me?" she asked. Because he said slowly, "You didn't cry when he gave you away. That means something." She looked at him then. Really looked. And in her eyes something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe recognition. Outside, the wind beat against the windows, carrying with it the scent of dry pine and something darker. Inside, Evelyn stared into the fire. She didn't cry. Not then. But she did reach for the cup of tea he'd set beside her earlier, untouched until now. Her fingers curled around the ceramic. She drank. Just one sip. In the quiet that followed, Silas walked to the window and watched the horizon. "They'll come," he murmured. "Who, your father? Or his kind? Shame doesn't sit long without company." Evelyn nodded. "Let them." Silas turned to her. "Are you ready for that?" She looked down at her lap, then at the ramp, then back at him. "No," she said, "but I'm not leaving." He smiled. The kind of smile you save for people who've just said something braver than they know. "Then we build," he said. "What more than ramps?" And for the first time, Evelyn's lips quirked. Not a smile. Not yet. But not anger either. "Start with shelves," she said. "Your pantry's a mess." He nodded. And just like that, they began again, not as savior and saved, but as something quieter, truer. A pact written not in words, but in shared silence hammer blows, and a ramp that led not just to a porch, but to a place she could claim on her own terms. The sun had long dropped behind the mesa, but its heat still clung to the earth like something desperate not to let go. The fields outside the cabin lay in a hush, golden dust, suspended in air, like time held its breath. Inside, the only sound was the creaking of floorboards under Silas Montgomery's weight as he hammered in a new brace under the porch. One nail, then another. Each strike deliberate, slow. The kind of work a man did when he didn't want to think. Behind him, Evelyn Shaw sat in her chair, hands folded neatly, back, straight face unreadable. She had wheeled herself out not long ago without asking, just as he hadn't asked why. He didn't speak, neither did she. "Until you think I'm weak," Evelyn said. Silas stopped mid-swing. The hammer paused in his grip, hung in the thick silence. He didn't look up. "You think I'm here," she said again, her voice sharp and dry as the air, "because you pity me." Silas turned, slowly resting the hammer against his thigh. Her face was set jaw tight, but her eyes, those damned eyes, burned with something far older than pride. "I don't pity you," he said, plain as dusk. Then why she pushed? Why build the ramp? Why fix the roof? Why treat me like I'm not broken? He took off his hat, rubbed the sweat from his brow. "Because you showed up," he said simply, and didn't cry. That stung her, more than she'd thought. "You think that makes me strong?" she snapped. "No," he said, eyes steady. "I think that makes you dangerous." Evelyn blinked. Once. A single breeze moved across the porch, stirring the hem of her faded skirt. "I used to think," she said quieter now, "that if I stayed silent long enough, I'd disappear. That if I didn't ask for help, I wouldn't owe anyone anything." She looked away. "Turns out silence is just another kind of leash." Silas didn't answer. He just listened. "My father," she continued, "used to say I was born defective, that God gave him a curse and called it a daughter." The breath in his chest turned to stone. "He told folks I was ill in the mind, that I imagined things, that no man would ever want a girl who couldn't even stand up to greet him." Silas looked at her then, truly looked, not at her body, but at the wreckage of belief she'd been made to carry. "He was wrong," he said. "No," she whispered. "He was careful." Silas sat down on the steps beside her, back to the railing. His knees cracked like dry wood. "I had a wife once," he said, "and a boy." Evelyn didn't move. The fire took them. Whole house. I was the one who lit the stove that night. Faulty kindling. Stupid mistake. She turned toward him slowly. I stopped speaking after he said, "For 6 years." Evelyn blinked again, but slower now. "So no," he said finally, voice rough. "I don't pity you. I just know what it looks like when someone keeps breathing because they forgot how to quit." Silence stretched between them again, but this one was different, not empty, just full. "Then I still dream of walking," Evelyn murmured, "but it's not what you think. In the dream, I'm not running toward anything. I'm running away." She looked at him. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. "From my father. From his voice. From every Sunday dinner where he'd say grace, then tell me to keep my legs covered lest the devil get ideas." Silas clenched his jaw. Do you know what it feels like?" she asked, "to be told your own body is a punishment?" He didn't answer, because he did, in his own way. But Evelyn wasn't finished. "He used to take me to the mirror," she said, voice low, "and list everything I'd never be. Not a wife, not a mother, not a woman. Just pity in a chair." Her voice cracked then, but not loud, just enough to slice the night open. "He didn't break my spine," she said. "He broke my name." Silas turned toward her, and for the first time let softness rise to the surface. "He doesn't get to name you anymore," he said. "Not here." Evelyn nodded. "Just once." "You know," she said, quieter still, "when he handed me over for that bottle of wine, he laughed. Said I was finally worth something." Silas didn't reply, but his hand curled into a fist beside him. "I'm not afraid of him," she added. "Not anymore." "I know," he said. They sat like that for a while. The moon began to rise behind the ridge, soft silver sliding down the porch railing. Cicadas sang low in the brush. Somewhere in the dark, a mule shifted its weight, breathing against the night. Then Evelyn said something so quiet, he almost missed it. "He took my mother's necklace before he sent me away." Silas raised an eyebrow. "She wore it when she left this world. I saw him take it off her neck before the soil even settled." He waited. "I'd like it back," she said. "Someday." And he knew then it wasn't about the necklace. Not really. It was about memory, ownership, taking back something no man had the right to steal. He stood, stretched. "We'll get it," he said. Evelyn's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but closer than she'd come in months. And as he stepped back into the cabin, Silas left the porch light on. Not because she needed it, but because there are moments when healing isn't loud. It's a single sentence, a door left open. A man who doesn't flinch when a woman says, "You think I'm here because you pity me," and answers with silence full of respect. Because real strength isn't in who gets to stand, it's in who gets to stay. The storm arrived without knocking. It came rolling across the plains like judgment, fast, wide, and unforgiving. Clouds the color of bruises swallowed the horizon, and the cottonwoods bowed as if remembering something ancient. On the fence line, Silas Montgomery wiped sweat from his brow and watched the wind sprint across the wheat, flattening it in long, panicked waves. He should have left earlier. But the eastern posts had been leaning, and he knew if he didn't fix them now, the rain would finish the job. He worked until the first drop struck his neck like a warning. By the time he reached the cabin, his coat was heavy with mud, and the storm was in full sermon. Thunder like old gunfire, rain that stung. The door creaked open before he touched it. Inside, Evelyn Shaw had already moved. A fire roared in the hearth. Cloth lay on the bench, dry and waiting. A bucket sat by the threshold to catch the runoff. Her silhouette hovered in the firelight, quiet, capable. Her hands, still scarred at the knuckles, moved with deliberate rhythm. Not fast, not graceful, but sure. "You forgot your hat," she said. Voice flat, eyes not quite meeting his. "You forget a lot of things when you've been wet this many years," he muttered, taking the towel she held out. Neither laughed. They ate on the floor that night. The table was too formal, too far. Stew from the bottom of the jar, wild carrots, salted pork, and 2 stubborn potatoes that refused to soften. Evelyn sat against the hearth wall, one arm propped behind her feet, stretched toward the heat. The firelight played along her calves, still too thin, but no longer lifeless. Silas sat across from her knees, aching hands raw from fence nails. They didn't speak much. Outside, the wind sang through the cracks, like an old hymn with no words left. Inside, Evelyn chewed slowly, as if every bite was something to reckon with. Then, without turning her face from the fire, she asked, "Did you take me in because you were lonely? Or because you thought I couldn't run away?" Silas didn't answer right away. He rubbed his palms together, leaned forward, and stared into the flame as if it might form the truth from smoke. "I took you in because no one else did," he said, "and because you didn't cry. Not even when he left you like a bag of rotting wheat. You think that makes me strong. I think that makes you dangerous." She looked at him then, not sharply, but like she was weighing whether to laugh or spit. Instead, she said nothing. Instead, she watched the flames. The next morning smelled like broken pine and wet rust. The storm had passed, but the ground still held its sorrow. Silas saddled the mule and rode toward the northern pass to check for washouts. He didn't ask if she'd be all right. She didn't ask where he was going. But around noon, as Evelyn reached for a sack of dried beans in the pantry, the latch on the door clicked. Not loud, just enough to shift the air. She froze. The door creaked open. 2 men stepped through like shadows with faces. The first was young, greasy, red-eyed face, too smug for his own good. The second she would have known even if her eyes had been sewn shut. Thaddeus Vane, her father. He stepped in like he still owned every piece of wood in the room. He shook water from his coat mouth already twisted in a cruel grin. "Well," he said, "I see you're still breathing." Evelyn didn't move. Couldn't. The younger man laughed. His boots thudded on the wood like an insult. "We came to check in," Vane continued, brushing dust from his collar. "See if the wine was worth it." Her voice came slowly rising, like a bone pushed through the skin. "You left me here like garbage. I gave you a home," he snapped. "Better than you deserved after what you did." "What I did?" Her voice cracked. "You embarrassed me," he snarled. "You ruined my name. And now you let that cripple farmer climb on top of you like some shut your mouth." The voice came from the doorway, steady, sharp. Silas, soaked again, rifle in hand, eyes like coal pressed too long in fire. Vane turned, startled, but Silas didn't raise the weapon. He didn't need to. The way he stood, the angle of his jaw, the stillness in his breath, it was louder than bullets. "You've got 5 seconds, Silas said, "to get out, or I make sure your boots leave last." The young man backed out first, drunk on bravado but suddenly sober. Vane lingered. "You stay here, you die here," he hissed, eyes locked on Evelyn. She wheeled forward. "Calm. Then I die standing." Silas stepped beside her. Not in front, not to shield, to witness. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, the storm remained. That evening, the world sat in silence. Not peace. Silence. The kind that tastes metallic, that nests in the ribcage. Evelyn sat by the window, her hands curled in her lap, her eyes fixed on the empty trail where her father had vanished. Silas didn't speak. He chopped wood until his palms blistered, fixed a hinge that didn't need fixing, cleaned a rifle that hadn't seen light in years. When darkness fell, she broke the silence herself. He used to say my spine broke because I was weak. Silas looked up, like I got paralyzed on purpose. He said it was punishment, said God was correcting a mistake. He didn't interrupt. He didn't say she was wrong. He just stared into the fire with her. "I wasn't supposed to survive the fever," she said. "But when I did, he told me to hide. Said no man would want a broken daughter. Said I was lucky he kept me." Silas spoke softly. Not a whisper. A vow. "Next time I won't wait for him to speak first." Evelyn didn't thank him. She just nodded. In that nod was a surrender not of strength, but of solitude. A quiet pact, not rescue. Recognition. The wind rolled in first, dry and restless, like the land itself held its breath. Evelyn Shaw had learned to listen to that kind of silence. Not the comforting hush of firewood crackling, nor the gentle rustle of her garden herbs on the windowsill. No, this was the kind of quiet that carried footsteps long before they arrived. She wheeled herself to the porch with practiced ease, the old wood creaking beneath her. Her fingers, though thinner now, were steady on the rim of the wheels. A kettle boiled inside. A storm brewed out here. And then she saw them. 2 horses, 3 riders. One of them she would have known in the dark. Judge Thaddeus Vane didn't dismount right away. He sat atop his gelding like a man auditioning for God's favor, chin high, eyes hollow. The same eyes that once looked at her like she was a punishment instead of a daughter. They hadn't softened. He finally slid off the saddle, brushing dust from his coat, like the land itself disgusted him. "Well," he drawled, boots crunching on gravel, "I see you're still breathing." She said nothing. Words were often wasted on men like him. The younger man behind him smirked, Jeb Crowley, his hired dog. The third, a wiry fellow with 2 wide eyes, stayed by the horses, sniffing like he'd been raised on whiskey and spite. "Didn't expect you to last this long," the judge continued, strolling toward the porch. Then again, strays always find ways to linger, like fleas on a dog. Evelyn's voice, when it came, was low but razor clean. "You rode all this way just to hear yourself talk." He stopped at the foot of the ramp. His lip curled. "You call this a ramp? Looks more like a church for termites." Silas Montgomery stepped out, then quiet as the swing of a barn door in wind. He didn't speak, just rested one hand on the porch post, the other holding his rifle loosely, like a man who'd carried death once and didn't need to raise it again to be heard. "Don't," he said. Thaddeus looked up. "Still playing husband, are you?" Silas's jaw tightened. Not a word. "I came for her," Thaddeus said, voice sharpening like rust on metal. "She's my daughter. Legally. You're harboring her like a prisoner." Evelyn's laugh was soft, almost kind. It cut sharper than steel. "I'm not a prisoner," she said. "I chose to stay. Something you never gave me the dignity to do." The judge stepped up one plank. Just one. That's all it took for Silas to lift the rifle. He didn't aim, just lifted. "You take one more step," Silas said, calm as prayer, "and I'll make sure you never ride again." The smirk on Jeb's face melted. Thaddeus held up his hands. "Fine. If we're playing frontier justice now." He reached into his coat. Evelyn didn't flinch, but her fingers curled slightly on her lap. Out came a letter. Thick, sealed with red wax. "A summons," he said, "from the district court. She's to return and testify. Restitution proceedings." He paused, voice slipping into mock concern. "They say you're with child. That true, Evelyn? Or is that farmer feeding you lies and lentils till your brain went soft?" Her mouth opened slightly, but it wasn't words that came. It was breath, cold and sharp like the truth before it's spoken aloud. "Get off my land," Silas said. But Thaddeus leaned in just a bit, voice dropping like oil. "You think any of this is real? That cabin, that dirt you're planting in. She's a ghost with legs that don't work and a mind full of childish fantasy." He looked at Evelyn. "You ruined me, girl, first by surviving, then by speaking." She stared at him, not with hate, but with something worse, pity. Then she reached under the shawl across her knees and pulled out a folded document. She tossed it toward him. It landed on the dirt dust, kissing the corners. "Read it, or don't. It says I'm emancipated. Medical records, land deed, witnesses, signatures." Jeb knelt to pick it up, handed it over. Thaddeus didn't even unfold it. He stared at her like she was a carving on a gravestone, familiar but long gone. "You think paper stops men like me?" he hissed. "No," she said softly. but it leaves behind proof for the world when men like you burn. There it was, the moment of break. He stepped back, not out of fear, but out of something smaller, something broken. You're not my daughter. Evelyn looked at him. Really looked. And when she smiled, it wasn't cruel. It's the first true thing you've ever said. They turned to leave. No dramatics, no guns, just dust and hooves, and the sound of a man realizing the world had moved on without him. Later that night, as the fire dimmed and the wind curled itself around the eaves like a tired animal, Evelyn sat in silence by the window. The paper he'd refused to read still sat on the table. She held a teacup hand steady for the first time all day. Silas sat across from her, boots off shoulders, sagging slightly, as he peeled an apple with a knife, older than both of them combined. She didn't thank him. He didn't ask for it. But after a long pause, she whispered almost to the window itself. He used to say, "God broke my spine to punish him." That my silence was proof, I agreed. Silas didn't respond immediately. The peel curled red and thin, falling into his palm like a ribbon of regret. Then he placed the peel gently in the fire. "Then I'd say God made a mistake," he murmured. "But the fire never burns what wasn't wood to begin with." She looked at him, eyes glassy, half laughing through the ache. "You talk like a prophet sometimes, Silas Montgomery." He met her gaze. And for once there was no weight behind it, no mourning, no war. Maybe I just learned to listen. And there, in that hush, as the last curl of apple smoke drifted through the rafters, Evelyn Shaw let her shoulders drop for the first time in years, not in surrender, but in the knowledge that something had shifted, a name had been said, a lie had died, and the truth. The truth had finally stood up, even if she never could. The snow had melted, but the soil was still reluctant. Spring on the Montana plains never announced itself with certainty. It crept in through cracked windows and the aching of bones, especially hers. Evelyn Shaw wheeled herself across the uneven earth behind the cabin. Her hands, still calloused from winter's defiance, rested on the rims of her chair. The wind was sharp that morning, carrying the smell of thawed pine and old smoke, but something inside her had settled just enough to begin. Silas Montgomery had said nothing when he built the planter box, just a series of nods and a wooden frame raised to the height of her lap. He'd lined it with burlap and filled it with soil from the edge of the creek where the snowmelt made it soft and dark. "You didn't have to," she had said, her voice cautious. "I know," he replied, setting the trowel down without looking up. "But you do." They hadn't spoken much since the night the judge left his parting insult still clinging to the walls, like mildew. "You're not my daughter." And Evelyn had smiled when she said it. "That's the first true thing you've ever said." Truth had teeth, but sometimes it also had roots. She reached into a small cloth bag, now fingers shaking slightly, and pulled out carrot seeds. She read the paper envelope like it was scripture, as though planting something could unmake what had been broken. Silas stood nearby, hands deep in his coat pockets, watching her without intrusion. He didn't speak, not when she dropped a seed, not when she wiped her cheek with the back of her wrist, not even when she whispered to the dirt, "Grow where they said nothing ever would." A silence settled between them, not the kind that burdens, but the kind that witnesses. That evening, Evelyn sat on the porch sharpening a paring knife. The motion was deliberate, rhythmic, like prayer for women who never learned hymns. She paused, looked at the raised bed, now kissed by orange dusk. "Do you know," she said softly, "when I was 8, I planted a row of violets behind the courthouse just one afternoon. Thought they'd surprise him. Thaddeus tore them out before court started. Said it made the place look sentimental." Silas didn't respond. He just adjusted the lantern flame. She looked up at him, then eyes clear and tired. I was sentimental. Still am. That's the worst part. I keep thinking maybe there's something left in him, like a seed under ice. Silas leaned against the post. Not everything blooms, Evelyn. She nodded. Still, some things rot deeper than we think. The next morning she found a doll on the porch. Porcelain, broken. Its spine cracked in half, legs shattered. Tied around it a strip of cloth that once belonged to her old Sunday dress. On its chest scrawled in charcoal, "Still worthless." She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She picked it up with both hands and brought it inside, placed it on the hearth like a relic. Silas watched her do it. He didn't move, didn't touch it. "I won't burn it," she said. "Not yet. It needs to sit here a while. Let it hear what real warmth feels like." Later, she wheeled back out to the garden, this time with onions. She pressed the seeds deeper than before. By midweek, she'd taken over half the porch with drying cloth, spice jars, and a small carved sign. Silas stepped over bundles of mint and thyme, careful not to disturb the order. He set a cup of coffee beside her one morning and said nothing. But she noticed it wasn't just her cup anymore. He poured two now. Always. One afternoon, the Reverend Amos Calder came to visit. He wore a black coat too new for such dust, and carried a Bible so stiff it cracked when he opened it. "This isn't suitable," he said, glancing around the porch. A woman, crippled, unmarried, living alone, with a man not her kin. Evelyn didn't look at him. She was grinding dried rosemary in a bowl. "You should consider institutional care," the Reverend added. "There are facilities, places of order, scripture, clean linens." Silas came out from the shed with an axe slung over his shoulder, said nothing. Amos stiffened. "You don't frighten me, Mr. Montgomery." "You're not the one I'm holding it for," Silas replied. Evelyn finally looked up, her voice low but laced with steel. "I've lived in cleaner places. I've lived with scripture too. It never covered me when I was cold, and it never told him to stop." Reverend Amos paled. "You speak like a woman without grace." "No," she said. "I speak like a woman who gave grace to the wrong man for 24 years. I'm all out now." He left without blessing the house. That night, she hammered the sign. Silas heard it from the barn. Not loud, not desperate, just steady. When he approached, she was halfway through carving the word. Why, he asked. She didn't stop chiseling. This place never had a name. And now she held up the board. One word burned deep into the wood. Spine. Silas stared at it for a long time, longer than she expected. "Because it's what they said I lost," she said, her voice barely above the wind. "But it's the only thing I have left that won't break." He swallowed hard. "It suits." The next morning she found 3 green shoots in the soil, carrots, tiny, defiant. She touched them gently, like she might a sleeping child. Behind her, Silas placed something on the edge of the bed, a small folded blanket, stitched by hand. A faded corner still bore her initials from years ago. "It was in the attic," he said. "You probably forgot it." "I didn't," she whispered. "I just stopped believing I deserved to ask for it back." He nodded once. "It's yours now." She took it in her lap, smoothed it flat. The light hit her hair like honey on stone, soft but unyielding. And in that moment, for the first time in months, Evelyn looked at the cabin not as a place she was left in, but a place she had stayed. The wind was thin that morning, one of those bitter, quiet breezes that slips through the chinks in the cabin wall and sits beside you like a memory you didn't invite. Evelyn sat by the window blanket over her lap spine, straight despite the ache. Outside, frost painted the garden bed she and Silas had built together. Nothing bloomed now, not carrots, not thyme. Only a rabbit trail in the snow told of something still alive out there. She didn't turn when she heard the hooves, just closed her eyes. She knew that gait, sharp, impatient, proud. Thaddeus Vane never changed his rhythm. The knock wasn't a knock. It was a command wrapped in wood and silence. Silas opened the door without a word. His rifle leaned against the porch post, not in warning, just present, like the way some men wear grief on their shoulders. Thaddeus stepped in without permission. His coat was too clean for a man who'd traveled 5 miles of snow. A younger man followed behind, a deputy maybe, or just another dog in a suit. "Well," the judge said, brushing a flake of snow from his sleeve, "you're still breathing." Evelyn turned then, slowly. Her face was pale, eyes, unreadable, voice clear. "You came all this way to check my pulse." He chuckled low and bitter. "I came to remind you of who you are." She wheeled closer, hands steady on the rims. "And who is that?" His eyes narrowed. "A burden, a disgrace, a thing I carried for too long out of pity." Silas didn't speak. He leaned one shoulder against the doorway, arms crossed, but his gaze never left the judge. "You always did enjoy a good monologue," Evelyn murmured, "like scripture without the love." Her father stepped closer. "You think this place gives you dignity? You think that cripple farmer loves you?" His voice rose bitter and sharp. "He's just as broken as you two ruin things, pretending to build something that'll rot in spring." Silas didn't flinch, but Evelyn smiled, not soft, not warm. A thin smile like steel drawn from sheath. "You're right," she said. "We are broken, but broken things know how to hold each other without shattering." The judge's jaw twitched. "You let that man touch you," he hissed. "You let him claim what I kept hidden all those years." "Hidden," Evelyn's voice cracked. "You mean locked, isolated, ashamed. You ruined my name," he barked. "I reclaimed my own," she said, barely above a whisper. That stopped him. For a second, Thaddeus Vane just stood there, the cold creeping through his boots, unable to fill the space she'd just emptied of power. He turned toward Silas. "You think this ends here?" he spat. "You think that paper she filed means anything? I built this town. I made the rules." Silas finally spoke. "And you forgot the cost." The judge's eyes flickered. "You've made her your pet." "She wheels around like some say it," Evelyn said, rolling forward until she was almost chest to chest with him. "Say what you came to say." He leaned in, and his breath was sour with rage. "You are not my daughter." Silence cracked across the cabin like a rifle shot. Evelyn didn't blink. Her hands trembled once, not from fear, but from something older. "I know," she whispered. "That's the first true thing you've ever said." The judge stepped back, startled by the quiet. His deputy shifted, uncertain. Silas moved his hand toward the rifle, slow, and measured, not to raise it, only to remind. "You should go," he said. But Thaddeus wasn't finished. He turned once more toward Evelyn. "You want your freedom? Fine. But don't come crawling back when this fantasy burns. When he leaves. When you remember what you are." "I remember," she said. "I remember everything." Her voice was hollow, but not empty. More like a well that had been filled too long with silence, and now echoed only truth. "Do you remember her?" she added softly. He blinked. "My mother," Evelyn said. "The woman you buried without a stone. Do you remember the lullabies she used to hum when your sermons got too loud?" The judge's face paled. "She used to sing to me after the fever," Evelyn continued, as if tracing a ghost across time. "She said my legs were tired, not broken, that I still had a voice." "Do you remember that he didn't answer?" "I do," she said. Every word. Her hands unclenched, her shoulders lowered. "I'm not here because of you," she whispered. "I survived in spite of you." The judge turned jaw-clenched fists tight and stormed out into the snow without another word. His boots crunched the frost like brittle bones. The deputy followed, not daring to look back. Silas walked to the door, closed it gently, and locked it with a quiet click. The wind outside moaned through the trees, but inside the cabin the silence felt earned. Evelyn wheeled herself back to the window. After a long time she spoke. "He used to say, 'God punished me for something she did.'" Silas pulled a chair beside her. "And what do you say?" he asked. She looked out at the frost-covered garden bed. "I say, he's not God." They didn't speak again for a while. Just sat. Two souls stitched together by loss and stubborn hope. Then, almost absently, Silas reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small cloth-wrapped parcel. "What's this?" she asked. He shrugged. "Something from the barn." She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a rusted tin sign, long-forgotten edges worn with a single word scratched into the metal in faded ink, "Home." Her fingers traced the letters, and for the first time since childhood, Evelyn let herself cry, not out of sorrow, but relief, because she had finally named the place where she belonged, and no man could take that from her again. The first snow didn't ask permission. It came soft and quiet the way grief does in old age, without thunder, just a hush that covers everything. It powdered the roof like sifted sugar gathered in the corners of Evelyn Shaw's window pane and whispered against the porch railing where her fingers sometimes rested in the dawn. Inside, the fire popped and sighed like it had bones of its own. Silas Montgomery was mending a leather strap near the hearth. His hands were cracked, darkened by wind and time. He hadn't said much all morning. He rarely did. But Evelyn could feel it, the waiting. Something in the way he stirred the fire with too much force, the way he glanced at the horizon more than his coffee. Trouble wasn't knocking. Trouble had already circled. 3 days had passed since the judge had ridden off, but the silence he left behind still roamed the house like a smell that wouldn't lift. Then came the package. Wrapped in burlap tied with rusted wire, it sat on the porch as if left by accident. No horse sounds, no boot prints, just the wind, the snow, and that lump of malice waiting by the door. Silas opened it with a skinning knife. Inside a doll, child-sized, handmade, torn at the spine. Legs bent inward like someone had snapped them and smiled while doing it. Across the chest, a single word scrawled in charcoal, "Still worthless." He didn't look at Evelyn, just stood breathing through his teeth like a man tasting blood. But she saw it. She saw it all. The way his knuckles whitened around the knife, the way his shoulders dipped not in defeat, but restraint. She reached for the doll, but her hand hovered. She couldn't touch it, not because of fear, but because of memory. That was her doll once, or one just like it, from before the fever, before the chair, before her father started calling her, "My shame." "I stitched that face when I was 8, she whispered, not knowing why. Mama helped me curl the hair with a matchstick. Silas said nothing. He walked across the room, opened the cast-iron stove, and tossed the doll in. It burned fast. Ugly things often do. But the words didn't burn with it. That night, Evelyn bled. It wasn't much, just a flicker of red, but enough. Enough to make her sit longer by the stove. Enough to feel the pull beneath her ribs that had nothing to do with rage or sadness. Enough to understand what her body had been whispering for days. She was pregnant. She didn't tell Silas right away, not out of fear. But because silence had been her shield for so long, she didn't yet know how to use words without feeling exposed. Instead, she folded the cloth she'd used, wrapped it around a single sprig of dried rosemary, left it on the table beside his cup. When he saw it, his face didn't break. It didn't light up either. It just softened like fresh snow landing on stone. "Is this he asked, voice breaking like an old hinge. She nodded. He sat slowly as if the weight of joy was heavier than sorrow. Are you? I don't know, she said. But I don't want to be afraid of it. And that somehow was enough. The next day, Silas built a cradle, never said a word about it, just worked until dusk, hammering pine slats beneath the lantern light. Evelyn watched from the porch, a blanket over her lap, steam rising from the teacup she didn't sip. She wasn't used to things being built for her, especially not things meant to hold hope. Later she found herself humming, soft tunes from childhood, half-remembered lullabies her mother used to murmur when the storm clouds gathered low. The music rose like vapor from thawed ground, but peace, like winter sunlight, is brief. A week later, smoke woke them. Silas burst from the bed, rifle slung across his shoulder. Evelyn wheeled to the window, her breath caught mid-chest. The barn was on fire. Orange curled against the dark like fingers clawing skyward. The snow melted around the blaze in black hissing circles. Silas ran into it. No coat, no shoes, just fury. He beat back the flames with his coat and bare hands. When the roof sagged, he cursed through cracked lips and soaked ash. Evelyn tried to follow, but her wheels sank in slush, and she could only watch helpless and burning inside. By the time he came back in, his palms were raw, his jaw tight, his breath shallow. Someone meant to trap us in that house, he said. They doused the back wall with kerosene. Evelyn didn't answer. She rolled to the stove, opened the cast-iron door, and stared into the embers. What kind of father sends fire to kill what he couldn't control? She asked, voice thin as wire. What kind of man tries to erase the life he once gave? Silas sat down, wincing. The kind who's already dead inside, he said. She didn't cry. Instead, she picked up a piece of charcoal from the stove and began to write on the back of a flour sack. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes didn't. It wasn't a letter of plea. It was a declaration. She named herself Evelyn Shaw. She named the child not his shame. She named the fire evidence. And then she folded the sack, placed it inside her sewing box, and whispered, "We plant truth in ashes now." The next morning, as the sun rose pink and brittle over the hills, Evelyn wheeled herself out to the porch. Her breath fogged the cold air. Her hands were wrapped in linen. Silas brought her coffee, set it on the ledge without speaking. After a long silence, she said softly, "You know what hurt the most?" He looked at her. It wasn't being thrown away. It was learning that someone could hate something so small and quiet, and still try to kill it. He nodded, but it lived. She turned to him, then eyes shimmering but not with tears, with clarity. "It lived," she repeated. "And so did I." And for the first time since the snow fell, Evelyn smiled, not wide, not triumphant, but real, like a candle lit in a room that had forgotten light. The barn was gone. The past was ashes. But inside her, something had begun to bloom. The frost hadn't left the ground, but the wind had changed. Evelyn Shaw could feel it through the wooden floorboards, how it crept in beneath the soles of her chair, curled around her ankles, and whispered that the world was shifting again. Not loudly, not like fire or thunder, but like paper sliding across a table. She sat at the kitchen table, the light of dawn caught in the wrinkles of her hands as she traced her finger over the ink. A name, a line, a claim. Evelyn Rourke, it read. Not a gift, not a mistake, not someone's burden or pawn. A woman, legal and whole. A name not inherited, not borrowed, but chosen. Silas Montgomery stood near the hearth sleeves, rolled arms dusted with sawdust from the cradle he was finishing. He hadn't asked where she'd gone that morning, or why she'd come back with a folded parchment held tight in a velvet pouch. He didn't have to. He saw it in her shoulders, the way she no longer hunched to protect herself, the way her voice when she spoke had the weight of a woman who had finally stopped asking for permission. "Did I ever tell you," she said quietly, not looking up, "that he made me sign away my voice when I was 14? Silas paused. He turned slowly. "What do you mean?" She unfolded a second page. The ink had faded. A legal document handwritten and notarized by someone long dead. A clause. A lie. A betrayal. "It was right after the fever," she said. "He had the town doctor declare I was unfit to represent myself. Said I was emotionally unstable, that I'd embarrass the family. I didn't even get to read it." Her eyes stayed on the paper, but her voice turned inward, speaking to ghosts. "He called it protection," she whispered. But what he meant was silence. There was a knock at the door. 2 short, 1 long. The kind that doesn't ask permission, just expects entry. Silas opened it to find Reverend Amos Calder, tall and pale with eyes like polished nails. He held a sealed envelope and a face shaped into piety. "She must return to town," he said, offering the paper without warmth. "The Judge Thaddeus Vane is no longer a judge," Evelyn interrupted, wheeling forward. Calder's smile faltered. "He still carries the weight of the county." "So does Mud," she said. He stepped inside uninvited and glanced around the small home. This place, he sniffed, reeks of defiance. Silas's jaw tightened. It reeks of wood smoke, hard work, and dinner. Calder ignored him. "Miss Shaw. Miss Rourke. Whatever name you've stitched onto yourself, the truth remains your father's appeal has been filed. He seeks restitution. Claims you're mentally compromised." Evelyn's hand trembled, but not from fear. She slid the documents across the table. "Filed with Franklin Hale, attorney of Helena. Includes notarized medical records testimony from the town's midwife and statements from 4 women your church refused to help when they were beaten by their husbands." Calder's eyes narrowed. "This is slander. This is truth," she said, voice firm. "And it's written down now, on paper, with signatures." Silence grew heavy. Calder stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think this ends with ink and sentiment?" Evelyn met his gaze. "No," she said. "It ends when men like you can no longer twist God into a threat." He spat on the floor. "You're still a cripple, Evelyn. And you'll die that way." She blinked slowly. "But I won't die afraid." When Calder slammed the door behind him, the house didn't rattle. But something else did something beneath the floor of Evelyn's ribs. Not fear. Relief. "I never thought I'd do it," she admitted. "I never thought I'd sign my own name and have it mean something." Silas walked over, sat across from her. "When my wife died," he said softly, "the hardest part wasn't the fire. It was the paperwork." She looked at him, puzzled. "I had to prove she existed, over and over again. Her birth, her marriage, her death. It was all paper. But none of it captured who she was. The way she hummed when it rained. The way she called my name when she was half asleep." His eyes softened. "You just did something different. You didn't write your past. You declared your future." Later that night, Evelyn sat by the fire, the new documents folded inside a blue kerchief tucked near her chest, like a second heartbeat. She stared into the flames, remembering another fire, the one that took her legs. Yes, but also the one in her father's eyes when he'd told her, "You are a burden. God regrets." She remembered how she'd believed him, for years. But now she knew God doesn't regret survivors. She didn't cry. There were no sobs, no theatrics, only a single line spoken aloud like prayer. "This is the first night I'm not ashamed to carry my own name." Silas didn't say anything. He just refilled her teacup slowly, carefully, and placed it near her trembling hands. In the distance, the wolves howled, but they sounded further now, softer. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, but inside the fire held steady, and between them, an old cradle, a pot of tea, and a name that no one could take away. The wind outside whispered through the eaves like it knew something was changing. Inside the cabin, Evelyn Shaw sat at the wooden table, her hands moving slowly, purposefully. She was stitching together pieces of old flour sacks, washing them soft and clean, turning them into something gentler baby linens. The quiet was thick, but not empty. It was the kind of stillness that held breath and memory in equal measure. Silas Montgomery sat across the room carving the edge of an old cradle he'd found in the barn's loft. The wood was dry and cracked, like it had waited decades for hands to return to it. He wasn't a man given to superstition, but that cradle forgotten in dust and cobwebs had the shape of something hopeful, something forgiven. They didn't speak much these days, not because there was nothing to say, but because the words between them no longer needed sound. But that night, Evelyn broke the silence. Her voice was low, quieter than the fire. My mother made a cradle once. Pine. She painted stars on the inside. Said babies should sleep under skies even if just painted ones. Silas didn't look up from his carving. What happened to it? Evelyn blinked slowly. He burned it. Said it was foolish to dream about things that couldn't last. There was no need to say who he was. The name Thaddeus Vane sat in the air like the soot from an old fire still clinging to the corners even after the smoke had cleared. Silas paused. Then, with calloused fingers, he reached into the pouch of his coat and pulled out a tiny tin star. Found this behind the pantry shelf, he murmured. Might have been hers. Evelyn reached for it with hands that had known tremors, but now moved like they belonged to something steady. She turned it over in her palm, the cool metal against her skin, a memory waiting to thaw. They told me I was broken, that I should be grateful just to be housed, fed, that people like me don't raise children, they slow men down. Silas didn't answer. He didn't have to. Instead, he laid the rifle across his lap, had a feeling he'd try something else. Fire was just the beginning. Evelyn looked at him long and level. What are you preparing for? He looked up, eyes old with storms. I'm not preparing for him, Evelyn. I'm preparing for you, for that child, for what might come crawling out of the dark thinking it still has power over you. She looked down at her belly, still small, still unsure, then to the cradle, then to the fire. I don't know if I'll be enough. Silas leaned back. The cradle creaked as he adjusted his weight. Neither do I. That's what makes it real. The next morning, snow had settled like sugar on the roof. Evelyn wheeled herself to the window, the world outside blurred by frost and sky. A single bird mad with winter hunger pecked at the frozen earth. She watched it quietly, mouthing the old lullaby her mother used to hum, a melody made of thread and soup steam and soft sighs. Behind her, Silas hung a clean oil lamp above the cradle. A soft glow fell across the room. Then came the knock. Not a fist, a gloved hand. Too polite for the wild, too deliberate for a neighbor. Silas picked up the rifle from behind the woodpile. He didn't cock it, just held it. The way some men hold prayers. When he opened the door, the cold came first. Then the voice. Well, well. The crippled girl and the dead man's dog. What a pair you make. Thaddeus Vane stood there, not in rage, but in something far more dangerous self-righteousness. Behind him, two deputies. Young, blank-eyed, pretending not to see what they were part of. I'm not here for theatrics, Silas. I'm here to reclaim my property. Silas didn't blink. She's not yours. She's carrying my blood. Evelyn wheeled herself into the doorway, spine, straight face pale but burning. Then you should have loved me better. There was silence. Vane's jaw twitched. You're unstable, Evelyn. You've been swayed by a man who lost his grip on reality and plays house with broken women. The court will see you as unfit. She held up the legal document, the one signed by the attorney in Helena, the one that bore her new name. It says Evelyn Montgomery, not by birth, by choice. Vane snatched the paper, crumpling it. Ink doesn't make you whole. Silas stepped forward, rifle at his side. His voice didn't rise. It dropped. Neither does cruelty. One of the deputies shifted, nervous. The other rested a hand on his belt, unsure. Vane sneered. You think you can protect her? You're just a man with a past, and soon a grave. Evelyn wheeled closer. The snow beneath her tires whispered like skin against silk. You said I'd never carry anything worth keeping. But this child, this life, it will never learn your name. That is your punishment. Vane's lips curled into something sour, but he stepped back. Not because he feared them, but because for the first time he saw it. The fire he thought he'd smothered was now holding a rifle and building a cradle. He turned. No apology, no repentance, just cold boots crunching into retreat. That night, Evelyn sat beside the cradle, running her fingers over the painted stars Silas had added during the afternoon. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she just whispered, "Mama, I made space for someone, like you did for me." Silas sat on the step cleaning the rifle. The air was still, and for the first time in years, Evelyn slept through the night, not because she was no longer afraid, but because she finally knew someone would wake if danger came, and someone else would sleep knowing she could stand watch too. Together they had built something more than shelter. They'd built home. And in that cradle beneath painted stars, the future rocked gently, safe, warm, and unafraid. The wind had stopped breathing. It left behind a silence so complete that Evelyn could hear her own pulse echoing in her ears, steady and stubborn, like the ticking of a clock no one could find. Snow clung to the porch rails like ashes. Every board of the cabin creaked with cold, and every part of her body, even the ones that no longer listened, remembered what it meant to brace for pain. She was alone out there, at least for now. Silas Montgomery stood just behind the front door, one hand resting near the rifle, the other tucked in his coat pocket like a man holding a prayer he wasn't sure he believed in. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Evelyn had asked him not to follow her out. "This is mine to face," she had whispered earlier that evening, "and I don't want to be hidden behind anyone's courage but my own." So he waited behind the shadows, behind her spine. Out in the field, past the fence line, dusted in moonlight, 3 horses approached, hoofbeats muffled by snow, but hearts never lie quiet. Evelyn's hands were folded on her lap, a small bundle of papers tucked beneath the blanket that warmed her legs. The wooden sign behind her read, "Spine," carved in uneven letters, defiant as breath in winter. And then she saw them. Thaddeus Vane dismounted, first all-black coat and blacker eyes, his boots crunching like bones. To his left, a younger man she didn't know, maybe a deputy, maybe a thug dressed up in law. To the right, a third figure kept his hat, low face unreadable. But it was her father who spoke. "You look well," he said, voice syrup thick with disdain. "Better than you should, all things considered." Evelyn didn't blink. "You came with 3 men in the dark to tell me I'm healthy." "No." He stepped forward. "I came to offer mercy before this gets uglier than it needs to." Behind her, the porch light flickered once. Then again. Silas's signal. "I'm here. I see them." "Mercy," Evelyn repeated, her voice flat. "Is that what you called it when you sold me for a bottle of wine?" Thaddeus's jaw flexed. "You're being dramatic. "And you're being small," she answered quietly. That stung. She saw it. The way his lips pressed together, the way the skin just under his eyes twitched like it used to when she was 12 and refused to lie for him. "You think this land makes you free," he hissed. "You think that man behind that door can keep you safe forever? I own the judge, the clerk, the land records. You think a piece of dirt and pity makes you powerful. I don't need to be powerful," she said. "I just need to be right." The deputy laughed one short bark that didn't belong to him. A crippled girl playing sheriff. Hell, maybe next week she'll start preaching too. Evelyn turned toward him slowly, her face calm. "You know," she said, "I used to hate my silence. I thought it made me small, but it kept me alive. And now it keeps me clear. You talk to fill space. I stay quiet to hold it." The man stepped forward, reaching toward the holster at his side. Then a single shot cracked the sky. Not at him. Straight up. The rifle smoke curled from the edge of the porch. Silas's voice followed low and hollow. "Take one more step, son, and you'll meet the part of me war forgot to take." The deputy froze. The horses shifted. The third man raised his hands slowly, not in surrender, but in regret. Evelyn saw it now, the lined face, the soft eyes. He wasn't there to fight. But Thaddeus Vane didn't flinch. "Is this how you want it to end?" "Evelyn," he called out, "in some shack with a man who can't save you buried in snow, with a name you stole, and legs that won't carry you anywhere." She felt her hand tremble, not from fear, but from rage that had finally stopped cowering. "I didn't steal this name," she said, lifting the bundle from her lap. "I earned it." She unfolded the papers steady as stone. "This is a notarized deed to this land," she said, "signed over by Silas Montgomery, witnessed, recorded. And here," she held up the second paper, "is my legal emancipation, stamped, filed, protected by the state of Montana and by a man in Helena who doesn't drink with you at poker." Thaddeus didn't move. "And this," she added, holding up the final slip, "is a signed affidavit from 7 women in this valley. All of them have stories like mine, and all of them are ready to testify about how you trade silence for power, how you used fear to raise your voice, but now you're just an echo." For the first time, Thaddeus's face changed, not with anger, with panic. "I can bury you in paperwork," he growled. "I've already been buried," she replied, eyes shining. "I dug myself out." He turned furious toward the third man, the older one. "Do something, damn you." The man only tipped his hat toward Evelyn. "I came to see the truth," he said. "And I've seen it." With nothing left to break, Thaddeus Vane spit into the snow and mounted his horse. As he turned back, he sneered, "You're not my daughter." Evelyn let the silence stretch before she answered, "That's the first honest thing you've said in my whole life." The horses rode away, no glory, no gunfight, just the sound of retreat. Evelyn sat there until they vanished into the woods, her hands unclenched only when Silas stepped down from the porch and sat beside her. For a while they said nothing. Then she whispered, "Do you think I overplayed it?" He gave a quiet grunt. "You underplayed it, if anything." I was shaking. "Yeah," he said. "That's what standing feels like." She chuckled softly. Then, after a long pause, he called this place a shack. "But I've never felt more home." Silas didn't look at her, just nodded toward the empty field. "Then it's a hell of a shack." The moon rose higher, casting long silver fingers across the porch floor. Evelyn reached out gently, placing her hand atop his weathered one. He didn't flinch, didn't say a word, but he turned his palm upward and held on. The first snow came early. It didn't scream down from the sky like some storms do. It whispered, soft and steady. By dawn, the porch roof held a thin white hush the kind that dares you to break it with boots or breath. Evelyn Shaw didn't. She sat by the window, wool blanket pulled over her knees, breath fogging the glass. Her hands, those same hands that once carved her name into pine and poured bullets into a tin with steady fingers, were now folded in her lap. Still. Not weak. Just waiting. Behind her, the fire in the old stove cracked low. Silas Montgomery was fixing the leg of a rocking chair that had come loose again. He'd mended that chair 4 times in 2 winters. He didn't say it aloud, but he liked the excuse. Wood could be mended. Flesh and memory. Well, they took different tools. "You should rest," she said without looking at him. "I am," he muttered, just in motion. Evelyn smiled faintly, her reflection ghosting in the window. "You always rest better with something broken in your hands." He glanced up. That a compliment or a diagnosis? Does it matter? He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Outside, the wind changed just a note. A low turn, and Evelyn knew. The same way birds feel weather, or women feel when someone speaks their name in a room they haven't entered yet. "They'll come again," she said softly. Silas didn't ask who. They both knew. You don't burn barns and leave dolls on doorsteps if you're finished. I'm not afraid, she added more to herself than him. "You shouldn't be," he replied. "But I am." That silenced the room. For all his grief and grit, Silas didn't say things like that. Not aloud. Not with his boots on. Evelyn turned from the window. Her eyes had aged differently than the rest of her. Not dimmed, just stripped of anything unnecessary. "They still think I'm the one who broke him," she said. "They think I turned my father cruel." Silas paused his work. "You didn't break him," he said. "You revealed him." By noon the snow had thickened. The sky hung low like it wanted to press something into the earth. Evelyn wheeled herself to the stove and started slicing dried venison for stew. Her movements were slower now. She'd been bleeding again. Not dangerously. Just enough to remind her healing wasn't a straight road. It was a circle that returned with every season. Franklin Hale sent a letter, Silas said, as he handed her a jar of preserved onions. "The case is closing. No trial, no press." "Of course not," she murmured. Thaddeus Vane always did prefer shadows to courtrooms. She didn't sound bitter. She sounded tired of being right. "Are you angry?" he asked. "I was," she said. "Now I'm grateful." He blinked. "For what?" "For the silence. It taught me how to listen." That night, just after supper, someone knocked. Not pounding, not urgent. Just 3 taps, like a formality. Silas stood. Evelyn placed a hand over his. "I'll go." He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. She rolled to the door, took a breath, and opened it. There stood a woman in a wool coat too thin for the snow. Late 30s, early 40s. Hair slick from melted frost. Eyes bruised with sleep she hadn't had. "Miss Shaw?" she asked. Evelyn nodded. The woman looked over her shoulder, then stepped forward, holding out a small cloth bundle. "My sister. Her name was Ruth. 2 years ago she came to you. You helped her write her affidavit. For the case." Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached for the cloth. She didn't survive the winter, the woman said. "But before she passed, she asked me to bring you this." Inside the cloth, a letter faded and creased. And a key. The woman continued. She said, "If anything ever happened to her, to find the woman who didn't run. The woman who made staying look like resistance." Evelyn swallowed. "Why now?" The woman looked away. "I'm expecting," she whispered, "and I didn't want to be hidden like she was." They stood in silence. Then Evelyn stepped aside. "Come in. You're home now." Later, as the woman slept on the daybed under 2 quilts, Evelyn and Silas returned to the porch. The snow had stopped. Stars blinked above them, crisp and distant. Evelyn spoke first. "I used to think a garden was a place where things grew," she said. "But maybe it's just the space where we decide not to bury ourselves." Silas stared out across the dark yard. The sign she'd carved spine was still there, half covered in snow, but standing. "She brought you a key," he said. "Yes." "What's it open?" Evelyn looked at him. "Does it matter?" He smiled. "No, I guess not." She reached down, gathered a handful of snow, and let it melt in her palm. "People think healing is loud," she said, "that it has speeches and forgiveness and triumphant music." Silas waited. "But healing is this," she finished. "A quiet hand. A door opened. A garden in winter." He nodded, then reached into his coat pocket and handed her something small. It was a packet of seeds. Carrots. "I saved them," he said. "From the last batch you planted. Figured they deserved another chance." She took them gently, held them to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Silas looked away, pretending not to notice the tremble in her voice, and from the window where the woman watched, one hand on her belly, the other pressed to the frosted glass, it was clear. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a beginning, even under snow,